Right now, somewhere in your city, a person is sitting alone in a room that has everything they need: food, a phone, heat, Wi-Fi. And they are dying. Not dramatically, not quickly, but their body is breaking down the same way a body does under sustained physical attack. Chronic loneliness does that. And for decades, medicine treated it as a feeling. Turns out, it's a lot closer to a disease.
In 2015, Brigham Young University researchers Julianne Holt-Lunstad and Timothy Smith published a meta-analysis. They pulled data from 70 studies covering 3.4 million people. Their conclusion? Social isolation increases your risk of early death by 26%. Loneliness itself, not isolation, but the feeling, raises that risk by 29%. Living alone bumps it to 32%. Holt-Lunstad compared the mortality effect to smoking, specifically to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That comparison keeps appearing in the medical literature because the numbers keep holding up.
But how does being alone damage a physical body? The answer starts in the nervous system. Your brain evolved to treat social disconnection as a threat. Not a metaphor for a threat, an actual physical threat. John Cacioppo at the University of Chicago spent 30 years studying this. He found that lonely people's brains run in a state of chronic low-level emergency. The amygdala, the part of your brain that handles fear, stays partially activated. Not because anything scary is happening in the room, but because your brain evolved on the African savanna, where being alone actually meant you were vulnerable. Separation from the group was a survival emergency. That circuit never got updated. So when you feel chronically alone, your nervous system behaves like you're being stalked. Cortisol floods the bloodstream. Inflammation markers spike. Vascular resistance increases. Blood pressure creeps up. And it does this every day, for months or years. Cacioppo called this hypervigilance for social threat. Lonely people don't just feel bad. Their brains scan the environment differently. They notice negative signals faster. They interpret ambiguous signals as hostile. They pull back to protect themselves, which makes them lonelier. Cacioppo described it as a spiral, each loop tightening the isolation. And it leaves marks on the body that doctors can measure. In 2007, Steve Cole at UCLA looked at gene expression in lonely versus non-lonely people. He found 209 genes behaving differently. Genes involved in inflammation were overexpressed. Genes involved in antiviral defense were suppressed. The lonely body was investing in fighting bacteria instead of viruses. Cole's explanation was evolutionary. If you're isolated and vulnerable to physical attack, bacterial infection from a wound becomes the priority. Viral threats, which spread person to person, matter less when you're not around people. The body is making a calculation that made sense on the savannah 100,000 years ago. It makes no sense in a studio apartment in 2026. The scale of this has become impossible to ignore. In 2018, Theresa May's government in the UK appointed the world's first Minister for Loneliness. The office cited surveys showing more than 9 million British people often or always felt lonely. In the United States, a 2020 survey by health insurer Cigna found that 61% of adults reported measurable loneliness. That was before the pandemic. Among adults under 35, the number was higher than among people over 65. The generation with the most digital connection on record reported more loneliness than people who lived through the isolation of old age. That data point does not resolve easily. The obvious explanation is that digital connection is doing something different to the brain than physical presence, and the research suggests it does. Face-to-face contact triggers oxytocin release. It activates the vagal nerve, which slows the heart rate and dampens the stress response. Texting does not do this. A phone call? Partially. A video call? Somewhere in between. The body keeps score on what kind of contact it's getting. Which brings up the harder question. If loneliness is this dangerous, why don't people just fix it? Cacioppo's research answered that too. Chronic loneliness physically reshapes how the brain processes social information. After extended isolation, the prospect of social contact starts producing anxiety, not relief. The brain has learned that people equal threat. Getting lonely people back into social situations without addressing that underlying threat response just adds stress. This is why just go make some friends fails as advice.
The cognitive distortions that loneliness creates work against connection. The interventions that work, according to Cacioppo's data, target the distortions directly. Cognitive behavioral approaches that help people reinterpret neutral social signals as neutral. Not positive, just neutral. That alone reduces loneliness scores. The physical damage also begins to reverse. Cole's gene expression research showed partial normalization of those 209 genes within months of reduced loneliness. The body responds. But you have to actually close the gap between digital contact and physical presence. The brain is not fooled by volume of messages. It's counting something else entirely. There is a version of this story that ends on policy. Urban design that creates accidental contact. Workplaces that don't treat remote as equivalent to present. Healthcare systems that screen for loneliness the way they screen for blood pressure. Holt-Lunstad has been pushing for exactly this since that 2015 paper. The science is settled enough. What lags is the instinct to treat social connection as a medical variable. Because it sounds soft, a feeling, an emotional problem, something to work out in therapy, not in cardiology. But 3.4 million data points and 30 years of neuroscience say otherwise. Your body does not distinguish between a physical wound and a social one. It mounts the same inflammatory response. It activates the same stress hormones. It wears down the same systems. The only difference is that one of those wounds is visible. And every time you wake up alone at 3 a.m., feeling that particular kind of hollow, that's your nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do on a savanna 100,000 years ago, sounding the alarm, telling you to get back to the group. The tragedy is that the alarm itself makes that harder. Loneliness is a biological signal that has outrun the environment it evolved for. And right now, it's running in millions of people who have everything they need except the one thing the body keeps asking for.